All right. Hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about why we fear rejection. Because this is one of those topics that I think is talked about so much in the self-help and the spirituality and the personal growth world. This idea that we all have this innate fear of being rejected. And so much of the discourse around this, especially like I say in spirituality and self-help and personal growth, is around the idea that this is wrong and this is bad and it's something we should be striving to get rid of, and that this fear of rejection is something we need to transcend in ourselves, and we need to learn to not care what other people think, and we need to learn to not care what other people are believing about us, and we need to get to a place where we just live our own lives and do what we feel good doing, and that it's all about, transcending this fear of rejection. And there is a narrative, right, that this fear of rejection is the thing that's holding all of us back from just like living our best lives. And I think that, again, as with everything in the spirituality and self-help world, there tends to be a huge lack of nuance when we talk about this fear of rejection, and there tends to be a pathologizing of what is normal human levels of fear and what is just going to be a part of what we experience as human beings on this planet, probably forever. And again, how this can turn into like a money-making machine for people who sell this idea of confidence and sell this idea of like, you can get to a place where you're so sure of yourself and you're so confident that you never fear rejection or you never worry about what other people are going to think of you ever again. And people never get there, right? Like they take these courses and they take these next up levels and they go to the thing and they do the mindset work and they do the breath ceremony and they take the plant medicine and all this stuff, and then they still they go home and they go to live their life and they're afraid of what people are going to think. They're afraid of the judgment, and they think, okay, I need more self-help, I need more self-improvement, this thing is holding me back and I'm not doing good enough. And it can, like I say, it can become this always striving, never arriving, which can be very good for teachers who teach this, because that means that they have perpetual customers. But at the same time, there is such a lack of acknowledgement of our humanity that we're being essentially falsely led down this path of like, this is what you should expect from yourself. If you are living your most authentic life, if you're doing your personal growth work, if you're doing your self-love work, that you should get to a point where you never fear rejection, you never care what other people think about you ever again. The fact that we think that that's a real thing, I think speaks volumes to how, again, our system is so good at pathologizing and making an enemy out of what is gonna be a part of our humanity for the rest of our lives, for as long as we live. And rather than giving us actual tools to work with our humanity and to find a balance so that we can feel good and we can still live lives that are fulfilling to us and that feel good to us, and where we can do things that other people don't agree with sometimes because it's the right thing for us to do, where we can have that. And also, we can deal with the reality that there is always going to be a part of all of us that fears being rejected and fears being left out and fears being not liked and fears what happens when we're rejected and left out and not liked. And rather than thinking that's a flaw and that's something we need to get rid of and that's something we need to heal and transcend and fix, and that we're not healed and transcended and fixed until that happens, we can, like I say, develop actual tools to help us just move through that when it's happening. Because I think the reality is that is always going to happen. I really don't think that it is possible for a human being to get to a place where they literally never fear rejection again. Okay, so this is, again, a conversation I want to have because it's nuanced and it's complex, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer. And it is not the same for all of us, our experience of fear of rejection. And when we blanket statement and when we make it all the same for everybody, and when we say that there is one way and one thing and all of this stuff, we oversimplify reality. And rather than this giving us real tools, rather than this actually helping us, because we think if we make reality simple, if we boil it down to it's like this for everyone and all that stuff, it sounds good and it sounds simple and it makes us feel comforted that there's a one answer and a one solution, and if I just do the right thing, I'm going to feel better all the time. We want to believe that, but the fact that that's not true, the fact that that's not how reality works, means that the more we try to implement stuff like that, the more we're just going to be disappointed. The more we're going to be perpetual customers that never actually get what we want. And like I say, the more we are going to shortchange ourselves in being able to live lives that actually feel good. Okay? So that is what we're going to talk about today. That this fear of rejection that we all carry to different and varying degrees is not a flaw in humanity that we need to spiritualize out of ourselves. It's not a flaw in our humanity that we need to self-help or personal growth out of ourselves. It is something we need to understand and embrace about ourselves. We are going to look at the roots of it today. We're going to look at where this comes from so that we can have some compassion for ourselves when and where it comes up. And we're going to look at tools to help us, because it is true, right? At the end of the day, we don't want to be living lives where we are so afraid of rejection, and we are so afraid of what other people think of us, and we are so afraid of other people being upset with us or not understanding us or not being able to validate us, that we have swung so far that we can't make our own decisions, and we constantly feel like we're living for other people and we're living for what's outside of ourselves, and living our whole lives feeling like we're just outsourcing our own values and we're outsourcing our decision making onto everyone around us so that we never risk being not liked, right? We don't want to live that extreme. But at the same time, like I said, we don't want to live in a world where we think we shouldn't care at all, and that being rejected shouldn't be painful, or that we're weak, or that we're flawed, or that there's something wrong with us if we sometimes make choices that are like, I did that because it was going to please someone else. That's normal. We're humans. So how do we find this balance? How do we find the happy middle ground between understanding our humanity and understanding how all of this happens and why all of this happens, and finding that balance of being able to be ourselves while embracing that there's always going to be a part of us that just wants to fit in and be loved and be accepted, and that will sometimes sacrifice doing what we want in order to have that. Okay, so where does this fear of rejection come from? As adults, living in adult bodies, walking around in an adult world, so much of the self-help, personal growth, and spirituality world tells us that this fear of rejection, right? It's the thing that's holding us back from living our authentic life. It's the thing that's making it so that we're not doing what our soul is calling us to do. We're not living our purpose. We're not living up to our potential. We are scared, we're small, we're playing small, we're not living life fully. And there's even this very common in the self-help spirituality world meme that floats around the internet every once in a while. It makes its circulation of people talking about the regrets of the dying, that at the end of people's lives, the thing they regret the most is not living a life that was more true to themselves. And this puts the fear of God in us, right? We all can resonate with that on some level, which I hope is a little hint to you, right? The fact that we all hear that, all of us on some level are going to hear the regret of the dying is that they didn't live a life that aligned more with what they valued and what they wanted to do and what they felt was real and true and important. They regret not living a life that meant something to them because instead they were living a life for other people, right? And that, at the core, is our fear of rejection. I'm living my life for other people. I'm living my life for the values of others. I'm living my life because this is what other people expect of me or what other people want from me or what other people think is good and what other people think is right, because I'm afraid that if I don't, I will be rejected. Yes? And this is some of the foundational work that I do with pretty much every one-on-one client I have, is we start with looking at what are we afraid is going to happen if we are rejected, right? If people don't agree with our choices, if people don't like who we are, if people don't, hey Izzy, if people don't agree with us and our choices and what we're doing, why are we so afraid of that rejection? What do we think is going to happen? Yeah? And even before that, when we're looking at our fears, right? For most of us, it's I am afraid that if I don't live up to having this ideal body, that's not a good thing, right? If I don't fix my body, if I don't lose weight, if I don't tone up, if I don't gain weight, if I don't whatever, that's bad. And I feel shame and I feel guilt about that. Or I feel shame and I feel guilt about my career. I feel like I'm never doing enough. I feel like I'm not doing the right thing. I feel like I'm not productive enough. I feel like I'm not worthy enough. Okay? I feel bad in my relationships. I feel like I don't have the right kind of relationship. I feel like I don't have enough of a relationship. I feel like I have too much of a relationship. We all have these insecurities and these things we're trying to fix about ourselves, these things we're trying to improve about ourselves. This is why we come to the personal growth, self-help, spirituality world in general. We're feeling uncomfortable. We're feeling like life isn't going how we want it to. We're feeling like we need to change something in the outside because it doesn't feel good and it's not right. And I always get people to say, okay, why? Why do we want that? Right? If you were to get the perfect body, if you were to have the perfect career, if you were to live up to the expectation, what do you think is going to happen? What are you going to get if you get there? And a lot of the time, people can't answer that question, right? It's, I would feel good. I would feel safe. I would feel good enough. And then on the other side, I say, okay, so what are we afraid is going to happen if we never get there? What are we afraid is going to happen if we never get there? And we usually do a couple of layers of questioning. Well, then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. Okay, why would that be bad? Well, because this. Okay, well, then why would that be bad? Okay, well, so, and we boil it down and we boil it down, and pretty much every single time, what we come to is the reason I want to achieve this goal, the reason I want to get to this place, the reason I want to fix my body, to have the right relationship, to have the right career, to be feeling like I'm doing enough, is because if I don't, people aren't going to love me and I'm going to be alone forever. Like, that is basically at the root of what almost all of us are afraid of. So yeah, literally having the spiral of fear, being alone, and fear of unknown, and fear of loneliness right now. Exactly. We are afraid that if we don't live up to expectation, if we don't please everyone around us, if we don't accomplish these things that we think we need to accomplish, that we are going to be unloved and alone forever. That's the fear. That's like the root fear that almost all of us are running away from 24/7. right? So rather than us having our goals and the things that we want and the things we're going after being rooted in, I want the result of that, right? I want to have a healthy body because I want the result of feeling good in my body and feeling strong and feeling healthy and being able to do what I want to do with my life. Or I want the results of my career being that because that is what I like spending my time doing. And if I'm going to spend, half of my life working, I want it to be something that I enjoy. And also, if I had that career, it would provide me with a certain level of comfort or being able to afford the things that I want or whatever, right? Like, rather than our motivations being something like practical in real reality, that I want this thing because it's going to give me a certain result that would make my life feel good. So much of the time, we're going to discover that the reason we're doing what we're doing and the reason we're chasing what we're chasing is because we feel like it will make us good. It will make us good people who are then accepted and loved and approved of. So why do we chase that so much? Why is there such a fear of being alone? And why are we so deeply wanting to be loved and accepted and included? Okay, we have to remember that we did not arrive in our adulthoods with all of our autonomy and all of our capacity to make choice and all of our ability to see cause and effect, consequences and outcome, and then just decide to subconsciously base our lives around what do I need to do to get love, right? We didn't just decide that. We didn't just make that up. We're not just chasing these goals because we think it will make us loved and approved of, because we're just silly and trying to sabotage ourselves, or we don't know what reality is, or whatever. We have to remember that for the first several years of our lives, okay, this cannot be overstated. And this is why, again, in my mystery school, we spend so much time looking at our childhood programming. Because if we cannot have compassion for the experience that we had as children and how deeply and profoundly that has affected us, how it has programmed us in ways that are so much deeper than what our adult intellect can understand and process right now. If we cannot have compassion for the experience we had as children, we are never going to understand ourselves as adults, and we are never going to understand why we do what we do and what our motivations are and how to actually support ourselves in feeling better. Okay? If we continue to treat ourselves as though we just arrived in adulthood as adults with full adult capacity and are just messing up our lives, we will never understand why we are the way we are and what we need. Okay? So this is, again, why we talk about this so much in the mystery school, why I repeat it so much in the mystery school, because we tend to forget. We tend to just write this off and forget and write it off and forget and minimize it. And so I designed the program to be something where I'm like continually driving this home so that you can start to like actually correlate your current behaviors with where it came from so you can have actual compassion for yourself. Okay? So again, in our childhoods, we have to remember that our first experience of what life was. So we did not have our adult perspective and the childhood perspective that we can flip-flop between. Most of us are projecting our adult selves onto our childhood selves. Our adult selves who know what we know now and have experienced what we have experienced now onto our childhood selves and saying, see, I don't know why I am like this. We have to remember that as children, the only experience of life we ever had was one of my caregivers, people outside of me, are the middleman between me and everything that I want. Our singular experience, while our brains were developing. Okay? Think about how deep this goes. Your singular experience of reality, while your brain was developing what life is, this is how life works, was in order to get my needs met, in order to be safe, in order to be able to express myself, in order for pain to be taken away and pleasure to happen, someone outside of me has to take me in, has to understand me, and then has to provide that for me. Do you understand? That was your singular experience of reality for the first 15 years of your life. While your brain and your body was developing. So you were not a fully functional adult who could rationalize what was happening. There was no part of you that had the experience of, if I am rejected by these people, it's okay, because I'm an adult who can feed myself and clothe myself and get along in life even if people aren't okay with me. Your one experience of life was, if these people outside of me don't approve of me, don't love me, they're not gonna empathize with me, they're not gonna understand me, they're not gonna take the time to figure out what I'm feeling, what I'm needing, what's good for me, what isn't, and then to provide that for me. Can we see why we might have a fear of death around being alone? When our first experience of reality, while every part of our being was developing its definition of what life is, while every part of us was developing what we had to do in order to survive, the experience was, the thing you have to do to survive is please the people around you, is be loved and understood and respected and empathed by the people around you so that they will provide for you what you need, because you do not have the capacity to understand what you need. You do not have the capacity to get your own needs met, especially for the first 7 years of your life. You are a complete victim to your caregivers while you are figuring out how life works. This is why you fear rejection. Because in your childhood, the first experience of life you ever had, rejection equaled not getting your needs met, not being safe. Because anything that separated you from your caregivers, from your perception, was a separation from your source of all things. We are striving for love and for acceptance because our childhood minds got the program that if and when I am perfectly loved and understood by the people around me, I will then have all of my needs met and be able to express anything I want to express. I totally have a fear that I won't be able to have the family I want to have if I don't find the right partner. Okay, so again, listen to this live and then ask yourself the questions that I'm going to leave you with, okay? Because there's going to be stuff to explore here. And part of that might be that these are actual values that you hold and that that's a real thing that you want, And there's a part of you that it's coming from the adult self. And then there might be a part of you, a part of it, that's coming from conditioning and all of these other things and fears that are not necessarily in alignment with reality. So let's just put a pin in that for a sec and look at the whole system first, okay? So we are afraid, right? So we believed from our childhood perspective that if our caregivers fully loved and fully understood us, that they would give us a perfect life, perfect safety. And all of us experienced on some level not getting that perfect life. All of our caregivers failed us at some time, at some place, intentionally, unintentionally. So this literally can range from outright abuse and neglect all the way to we had incredibly loving and caring caregivers who were just human and couldn't always meet our needs and couldn't always keep us safe. Because this is the other thing. A huge part of our childhood perspective was my caregivers are capable of meeting all of my needs. My caregivers are perfect beings who are perfectly able to meet my needs. Or we did realize that our caregivers were flawed and they couldn't do it. They couldn't perfectly meet our needs. They couldn't perfectly protect us. They couldn't perfectly provide for us. Either we knew one of the two things. And this means that any amount of us not getting our needs met was still an existential crisis to us. We couldn't determine and figure out and realize that things were going to be okay if they were going to be okay. Right? Every moment we felt unsafe, every moment we felt like our caregivers were being separated from us, we were in pain and that pain wasn't being taken away, our caregivers were irritated with us, our caregivers didn't like us, our caregivers couldn't meet our needs. That was a big deal. And the degree to which we felt unsafe in general with our caregivers was going to be the degree to which any amount of them not meeting our needs was going to be traumatizing. So for some of us, we generally felt safe with our caregivers. For some of us, our caregivers provided a safe enough environment that sometimes they couldn't meet our needs, sometimes they weren't there for us, sometimes it wasn't, but that wasn't traumatic for us because generally speaking, we knew we could trust them. We knew we could rely on them. And that secure attachment generally leads to people who have less fear of rejection. Think about this. The people who had childhoods where they were generally safe, where they generally had their needs met, where they generally had caregivers who were empathetic with them, tend to grow up to be people who are more self-assured, who have more of an idea of what they want and what they're doing in life, are less codependent, because they grew up with a certain sense that life was going to be okay. That even when caregivers don't approve of me, or when they don't love me, or when they get upset with me, I'm still provided for. Things are still okay. They had an experience of even when mom and dad get upset with me, or they yell at me, or they whatever, love isn't taken away. Safety isn't taken away. I'm still generally pretty happy. On the other side, when we were continually in a state where our needs were not being met, where we were being neglected, where we were being abused, we were going to continually turn that in on ourselves. as what am I doing wrong that's making my caregiver reject me like this? That's causing them not to meet my needs. So again, even if we could understand that this was happening because our caregivers just couldn't, that was still incredibly traumatizing. Not having our needs met, continually not having our needs met, continually feeling unsafe was going to be traumatizing to our nervous systems. And the only tool we had as children to try to control that, to try to control our caregivers meeting our needs, was our own behavior. It still seemed to us that caregivers were the source of everything, and that our one point of autonomy, our one point of control, was to try to figure out what we were doing wrong, or what we could do better, or what we could do different, so that caregivers would treat us differently. And so again, sometimes this was outright. Sometimes caregivers were saying, you can't be like that, you can't do that, you have to reject this part of yourself, this is not okay, this behavior is not okay, this is not okay. And we were learning, okay, this is a bad part of me, I can't be like that, I can't do that, I gotta shut that down, I gotta be this, and I gotta do that. Or we were drawing connections between our behavior and our caregivers not meeting our needs or abusing us that weren't even there. Right? Like if our caregivers were just completely overwhelmed and just couldn't be there for us emotionally, and it really had nothing to do with us, but we were experiencing lack of connection, we were experiencing being abandoned, we were experiencing just not having that secure connection because our caregivers were overwhelmed or not present or whatever, we were going to be continually being, okay, what did I do this time? What did I just do that made them roll their eyes? What did I just do that made them go away? What did I just do that made them do this? Because we're insecure. Because we're continually in a state of not getting our needs met. We're going to be constantly looking for our needs not to be met, and then trying to figure out what we just did wrong to cause that to happen. Do you see what I'm saying here? So the more insecure we felt, the less our needs were being met. The more insecure we were going to be growing up, the more we were going to then have all of these fears and insecurities about who and what we were and what we are, that we think or that we know caused our caregivers to reject us or to pull away from us. And then we are going to have an existential relationship with all of those parts of ourselves. Right? This is why, again, in the mystery school, we spend so much time talking about the parts of ourselves that we think are wrong, bad, and shameful. The shame and the guilt that we have. Because, again, usually at the end of the day, we don't like these parts because we learned in our childhoods that these parts separate me from my caregivers. These parts separate me from the perfect, safe environment I'm supposed to have. These parts cause my caregivers not to care for me. And that's bad, and that's scary, and that's wrong. Because if they are not caring for me, I am not safe. So this is why, again, we see that there is a big disparity in the amount that people are afraid of being rejected. Right? There are some people, like my husband, who grew up in a household where, generally speaking, his needs were met. He was safe. So were there times where his caregivers antagonized him and made him unsafe, and these things happened. Yeah, generally, like, everyone has that. But overall, he expected his needs to be met. And so he grew up with a security that things were going to be okay. So his brain was not in survival mode. He was not being flooded with cortisol all the time. And he grew up to be pretty self-assured. I, on the other hand, experienced a lot of neglect and my needs not being met. And my perpetual experience in my childhood was one of not being safe and not being cared for and not being looked after. And I was probably one of the most codependent people you've ever met. I was so afraid of anyone or anything not liking me that it would like keep me up at night, most nights. I would be tossing and turning, just thinking about what I should say to this person, what I should say to that person. And if someone didn't agree with me, it was like the end of the world. And like someone could disagree with Marcus and he'd be like, oh, well, they're wrong. Or, yeah, I can see their point. And that's it. And I was just like, how do you do that? Like, how could you, how do you just like not care? Well, he grew up where his nervous system didn't learn that rejection equals death. Because he had relative safety. So, first things first. How safe were you in your childhood? And not objectively. Because again, a lot of us can look back and be like, well, there was always food on the table. They sent me to school. I always had clothes. I really didn't have anything to worry about. Okay, but what was the actual experience you had as a child? What was your childhood experience? That your caregivers were, you never knew if they were going to be there or not? That their love was inconsistent, right? Sometimes it was there. Sometimes they were empathetic. Sometimes they cared. Sometimes they didn't. You couldn't predict. You didn't know what it was going to be one day to the next. You were constantly in a state of fear. That is going to have a huge impact on how you now move through the world. Okay, next question. How can you identify a rejected part of ourselves? Anything you have shame or blame about. It's pretty simple in terms of identifying. Anything where you feel shame. Because shame is never the truth. Now, right? This does not mean that we don't sometimes cause harm and that there shouldn't be a feeling of like, ooh, that wasn't good. That's not the result that I wanted. Okay, but there's a difference between I am bad and there's something wrong with me and this part of me is bad and this expression is not bad. Yeah, this expression is bad and okay, that behavior didn't get me the results that I wanted. There's a huge difference between being able to identify a harmful behavior and where that comes from and what we intended and what we thought was going to happen and do all of that versus this is bad about me. Okay, so I have so much work in the mystery school around this because it is complex and it is deep. But start with anything you feel shame about. Where did that shame come from? Where did you learn that you can't be like that and why? Okay, so our lives are always so incredibly validating and healing for me to listen to. Oh, your lives. Thank you. I'm glad. So we need to start with that. We need to start with our foundations. If we lived in perpetual insecurity, we are going to have adult lives where we perpetually feel insecure. And where, again, it became more cemented in our bodies and our brains that to be rejected is to not have our needs met than people who had their needs met, generally speaking, on a regular basis. What was it like for you? Have compassion for yourself. Okay, so some of us, like I say, some of us are going to come into our adulthood and we're going to realize, like, I can't make a decision if I think anyone is going to be upset with me about it. I cannot be okay if someone is upset with me, or if someone disagrees with me, or if I am feeling like I'm not living up to expectation. And it's like debilitating. Okay, so that's the level where we want to look at this. Versus the spirituality, self-help, personal growth world pathologizing normal levels of fear of rejection, right? So like if you're in a group and there's room for you to express your opinion or to ask a question, and you get a little scared about that, but you still do it, you're okay. You're a normal human, right? Like you had a little fear of rejection. There was a part of you that was like, oh, maybe that was stupid, or maybe I shouldn't say that, but you did it anyways. You probably don't need to work on this so much, right? Like, let's not turn this into a thing where we're constantly navel gazing and it's like, oh, well, there was still that little fear in me, so there's more work to do. No, it's okay, right? Like, you were able to live your life, generally speaking, you're okay. You're doing okay. It's normal to have a fear that people are going to think you're stupid. It's normal to have a fear of putting yourself out there and what's going to happen and maybe being a little insecure about it. But if you can generally, like I say, like live your life, don't turn this into another thing where you're like, I have to get to a place where I'm like at zero, and thinking that you're not spiritually transcended until you're at zero. And especially caring about the things that the people who are deeply close to you care about you and think about your life. That's going to be a part of it. That's going to be a part of being alive. So then my question for you is simply, are you able that when it is very important to you and when something really matters to you, are you able to do what you need to do and what you want to do? Or does the opinions of other people hijack your life to the point where you feel like if you get to the end of your life right now, you're going to be like, I didn't do what I wanted to do because I was living for other people? So now if we're at that level, again, there's no one simple answer. There's not one thing all of us are going to do so that we don't have that regret of the dying. This is going to be a process. So the first thing that I want you to understand is anyone who tells you, I can help you transcend your fear of rejection in this simple course or in this 30 days or this mindset hack or whatever, red flag on that. Okay? Just red flag it. Maybe it's a part of the path. Maybe it's a tool you can put in your toolbox. But it's probably not the thing, because there isn't going to be a the thing. Rather, there are going to be several steps that you're going to take. So the first step is grieving and having compassion for that childhood you that was not safe, that didn't learn that you could be rejected or misunderstood or have a conflict with your caregiver or whatever and still be okay. There needs to be a process of grieving and shaking and crying and being upset and being angry. And this is another big thing I want to put out there, that for a lot of us, we don't want to get angry at our caregivers because we can see that they didn't mean it. We can see that they were struggling. We can see that they were doing their best and they weren't able to provide for us. And then we're saying, so therefore my pain shouldn't exist. Or my pain isn't valid. But the truth is, right? If your caregivers loved you and they were doing their best and they were working 2 jobs every day to make sure you had food, and they didn't have enough money to have food for you, their love and the fact that they weren't doing it on purpose didn't erase the nutritional deficiencies you would have been experiencing. Right? We never would look at you and say, well, you shouldn't have physical pain from not having enough food, because your parents are trying. They want to. They're good people. They're not hurting you on purpose. So you should be physically a star. Right? We can see that that's ridiculous. We need to be able to hold both ideas if this is true for us. That our caregivers were trying their best, that they were doing their good enough. They weren't intentionally hurting us and harming us. But that doesn't erase that we were not getting our needs met. That doesn't erase the trauma of that. That doesn't erase the impact of that. We need to process what happened to us from our point of view as a child. So again, from our point of view as a child who didn't know it was going to get better, who didn't know that you were going to grow into an adult and be okay, who didn't have the awareness that one day you were going to be autonomous and you were going to be able to make choices for yourself that made your life better. Because you have that experience now. So you can look back on your childhood and be like, it wasn't that bad. Because I know now I got out of it. But you didn't know that back then. In your childhood, what you were experiencing was it, and that was what life was always going to be. So there is no overstating the fact that we can't just pretend that didn't happen. We can't spiritualize it away. We can't higher reasoning, yeah, well, I chose it in a past life and that's what I needed for my growth and look at how strong it made me. Sure. Doesn't erase the trauma. Doesn't erase the fear that's going to be living in your body and driving you. It needs to be processed. It needs to be felt. It needs to be grieved. You need to be validated and seen and loved in your pain, told it was not your fault. You need to be, right? You need to learn how to not have shame and guilt about these parts of yourself. It's a whole thing. So I have a mystery school for it. You can get therapy. You can get coaching. You can work with people who know about this stuff. You can read books. You can watch YouTube videos. I have lots of YouTube videos on processing this stuff. There's free resources. There's paid resources. But take some time to process what you went through. Don't keep trying to drive ahead and just change how you are now without processing what you went through. Because those are your foundations and they are always going to be there. I talk a lot about this metaphor of like, you can redecorate a house all you want, but if the foundations are rotten, it's always going to smell. Doesn't matter how nice of a paint job you put on it. Doesn't matter how much personal growth you do now. Doesn't matter how much mindset work you do now. Doesn't matter how much you try and convince yourself that it was all something you chose in a past life and look at how great it turned out for you now. Doesn't erase what you went through. Doesn't erase what's living in your nervous system. And that fear, that's why it keeps coming back up. Okay? We got to process. Second thing, we start to orient ourselves to our adult reality. So every time we experience that fear of rejection, we need to slowly unpack, okay, what do I think is going to happen if I am rejected? What am I not going to get? What am I not going to experience that I want to experience, that I think is going to come through being loved? What am I going to experience that I don't want to experience? What do I think the negative consequence of being rejected is going to be? Really unpack this for yourself. When you're really deeply afraid of what's going to happen, question it. Don't just stay at the surface of I'm afraid I'm going to be rejected and then start scrambling. Okay. Take the time to orient to what's actually happening. Is what you're afraid of actually true? Will that actually happen? And like I said, a lot of the time we can also look deeper into what we actually want, because this is the next part of it. Part of learning to not be so afraid of rejection is to understand that sometimes what we actually want, when we say, I don't want to be rejected, is something we're unaware of. In other words, I want to be loved and accepted and approved of by this person because I think that if I am, they are going to understand me and meet this need that I have. So this is where we can start to step into our adult perspective. Because remember, the childhood perspective is, I'm in pain, I want something, I need something. Someone outside of me has to understand me and then do that for me. So a lot of us will even have this reverse thing of I have a feeling, I have a need, I have a want, but I don't know how to identify it. I don't know how to meet it on my own. So then I just start looking for who do I please? Because that's the childhood mechanism of when I have a need or when I have a want, I please someone and then they figure it out for me. So sometimes we have to start to say, what do I actually want or need right now? If it's not actually approval, right? Am I wanting to express something I don't know how to express? Am I wanting a snuggle? Am I wanting, what do you want? What's the actual need? What's the actual desire? Start to become actually aware of what you want. And this can be like a real trip. Like when we do this work really well, we can be like, okay, like I think if all these people approve of me, it's going to lead to me having, what, 1 million clients, and then I'll have $1 million, and then I can feel safe. So what I actually want is like financial security, because I'm feeling financially insecure. It's not really about approval. So this is when we can start to understand what our real values are. So again, that question of like, how do we start to live a life in alignment with our actual values and what we actually want? We have to figure out what our values and what our wants actually are. Because it's not love and it's not approval. But when that's clouding everything, we can't see what's actually motivating us. So we can ask ourselves, if I were to be fully loved and approved of forever, what do I think I would get? Okay, and then this is the other big thing. Looking at where the consequences of our lives are not what we want them to be, where the conditions of our lives are not what we want them to be, and where we have a subconscious belief that the pain we're in is because we're being rejected, when in reality the pain we're in is because of the choices we're making. This, again, can be really hard to wrap our minds around. But like I have had so many people come to me in like sessions who wanted me to validate their perspective so badly because they thought that if I agreed with them if I validated them, if I approved of what they were doing, it would all of a sudden give them the results that they wanted. Like, if they will come to me with their diet and be like, I'm doing this diet, and do you approve of it? And my question is always, okay, well, it doesn't matter if I approve of it. What are the results you're getting from it? Is the diet actually giving you the outcome you want or not? Because at the end of the day, I can approve of it all I want. And if it's not the right diet for you, it's not the right diet for you. And we sometimes literally are living in a world where we actually think, but we're not consciously thinking it. We have a belief that what we're doing will work eventually if just everyone agrees with us. We're disconnected from reality. And we're living in codependent childhood reality, where results were based on what other people thought. We're not living from actual outcome. We're living from it's hurting because people don't agree. Or if only I were perfectly approved of, everything that I'm doing would be great. And we need to start to realize that that's not true. Everyone can agree that something is beneficial. But if in real reality it isn't, it isn't. But we need to be able to take ourselves back enough to say, what are the outcomes of what I'm doing? Is it giving me what I want or not? And if not, why not? So then back to Izzy, right? Like, I'm afraid I won't have the family that I want if I don't find the right partner. Why do you want the family? What do you feel like having the family is going to give you? What are you not going to have if you don't have the family? Where did this desire to have a family come from? And again, it's not to say that any of this is right or wrong, good or bad. I just want you to understand what your values are and why you want these things and what the desire is coming, where the desire is coming from. And then again, I think sometimes we just have to understand that we cannot always create the lives we want to create. That we don't have perfect control over everything. And sometimes we are striving for that approval and that acceptance because, again, we believe it's going to lead to a heaven on earth situation. That if we were just approved of enough, that we'd be able to have all of our needs met, we'd be able to express exactly how we want to express. And there's like this snake eating its own tail thing, where we're changing ourselves to be approved of, because we're hoping that one day we'll be approved of enough that it will be safe for us to be our true selves. We're changing ourselves to be what everyone wants us to be, hoping that one day it will make us safe enough to express what we actually want to express. And we got to start to realize, okay, that's never going to happen. There's never going to be a perfect safety. That secure attachment that I'm looking for, that perfect love that creates the perfect environment where I can have a perfect life, is never going to happen. And we have to grieve the loss of the heaven that childhood part of ourselves is seeking through looking for validation. Because I think that that's a big thing for a lot of us that we don't even realize is there. Is that we're hoping that perfection is possible if we just get ourselves to be approved of enough. You might recall the presence that you felt near as a child. I see that as the spirit of friend energy. If you go back and talk to that, recapture that spirit, it may help. I don't know if others felt that entity. Yeah, totally. Right? Going and revisiting your child self. Like in the mystery school, I have an unconditional love meditation that I feel like is really powerful for helping us feel that feeling of love and getting that need met. And then it helps us to understand the consequences of our actual actions and what we really want and what we really need when we feel like we're going to be loved. Again, this is why the mystery school is so long, because processing this takes time. So in this video, I just really wanted to give you like the Coles notes. I hope that it has given you some awareness. I hope it's given you some ability to have compassion for yourself and some tools to start with. And again, check out my YouTube channel, check out my blog. There's lots of free resources on this. And yeah, this goes deeper than just you're going to mindset your way out of it. And I hope that this has validated that for you, that there's nothing wrong with you, that you fear rejection, and that we can start to develop tools and awareness that will help us feel better over time, and understanding that this is not going to ever be a simple solution. There isn't a one step to make you just confident, especially when we experienced a lot of insecurity in our childhoods and we didn't even get to like figure out what our values are and what we want and what a life that we live that feels good for us would even look like. And where we just have this deep, deep, deep guttural fear, like even if we know what we want, we're just so afraid to go after it. Yeah, some of us are going to be really, really afraid. And learning to hold ourselves through that and do it anyways is a huge deal. And it is not easy. And it takes time, and sometimes it takes support. So don't pressure yourself. It's not something we just fix overnight. It's slow and it's step by step, and it starts with compassion. Understanding where that came from. And then curiosity. What do I need right now? How can I start to support myself now? How can I start to show up for myself, the me that exists right now? And maybe that is, I'm not ready to start to take steps to like living my best life, or I don't even know what that is, but I need to grieve what happened to me. And that's the phase I'm in. So be there. Get help, get support, go through some programs, do some work. But understand that this is going to take time. It's scary and it's hard. Learning to live in your adult perspective, where you know you can get your needs met even if people don't approve of you, is very challenging. So please go slow. Have patience with yourself. Understand where this came from, and let that start to be the foundation for getting your needs met instead of just trying to get rid of this. Okay? Okay. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. There's nothing wrong with you. Don't let anyone pathologize your normal human self. Okay? And I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.